Hi, everybody, and welcome to another edition of Education Matters with Jim O'Connell. Very pleased to have you with us. If you're watching live, it'll be Tuesday afternoon. I have a guest with me this week who I'll be happy to introduce in just a second. As always, we'd love to hear your calls. The number here is, let me find it, 640-3091. So if you have anything on your mind, something you'd like to share, as you'll have seen from other shows, you don't have to necessarily agree with me. 640-3091. As ever, we're here in the dog days of summer, and just disregarding yesterday's rain, we've had some really nice hot weather. You'd think that this would be a quiet time in our city, but as we're speaking here tonight, we are in the middle of what'll be the end of a voting day for special elections for those of you in wards 12, 1, 2, and if there anybody happens to be in Hooksett, Bow or Dunbarton. But if you are sitting at home watching this live right now on Tuesday afternoon and it's 6 o'clock, you have 1 hour left to get to the polling station because the polls in wards 1, 2 and 12 will be closing at 7 o'clock. And get out there and vote. The candidates are Kevin Kavanagh, an alderman from the board of mayor and alderman, and Mr. David Booton, who a former state senator. So I make no secret of the fact that I'm a strong supporter of Kevin Kavanagh's. But I think the most important thing is for people to go out and vote. That's the first thing, and then if you vote for a flavour of your choice. I'm delighted to have who I like to think of as a friend of mine, and I do think of him as a friend of mine, school board member Ross Terrio. I'm delighted to have you here tonight, Ross. Welcome once again.
Thanks for having me, Jim, and I consider you a friend, and although we never agree, we have some great discussions.
We do.
And we really flesh out. What I like about it's not just you throw something out and I throw something out, I just attack it. We really delve into the details and the policy.
And I'm going to disagree with you immediately by saying that I don't agree that we disagree all the time or there's nothing we agree about. I think there's a few things we probably do. But you're right, but I was here on this show last week and a couple of people called in, and one of the gentlemen who called in made the point that I was sort of whatever, attacking might be too strong a word, but I was talking about Mayor Gatsas and education and what hadn't been done for education in the city. And he made the point that, hey, it's not just Mayor Gatsas. He's one guy, and there's a full board of school board members around him, and then there are 14 members. And he said, why don't you go after Dan O'Neill and Pat Long and all these guys? They're as much. And once he finished speaking, I said, I agree with you. So my point here is there's learning goes on, when you listen to other people. I like to talk a lot. I like to listen a lot. And I made the point in the show last week that, and I have said it, and I've had discussions and disagreements with both Pat Long and Dan O'Neill on the topic of education in the city. I do sort of hold a special place for Mayor Gatsas because he is at the pinnacle of the pyramid. But the point I just want to make here is that I think it's important to. I dislike the current discourse, for want of a word, we have in America on politics because it's often nasty and unkind and then inaccurate and very partisan. And I'm not trying to be holier than thou, but I do try to look at the other side, I try to listen to sides, and we're all in the end subjective. I can't say that. I like to think that I'm Mr. Subjective and I work it all out. I try to be that, but I'm sure I fail quite a bit. But we only move forward by learning. So and I like talking with you, Ross, because we're able to talk. And disagree, which is wonderful, right? Because and I'm hoping to convince you one day to come and see my side and whatever. So since you're a candidate for, I know you have somebody running against you now in Ward 7.
Yes, sir.
And but let's start with that. You want to just not to put you on the spot, but so you're running. The people of Manchester have had a chance to know you now because you've been there a couple of terms, I think, right?
Second term, yeah.
So tell us why you're running or whatever you want to say.
So basically, what we got involved in the Manchester school system. I have 3 kids. All went through the Manchester school system. Pre-K through senior year. Although my son is still in the high school system, so I was very concerned. Heard about school overcrowding, so I volunteered this year as a teacher's aide when my son was over at the Jewett Street School, because I went to the parent-teacher conference and I said, how many kids do you have in the class? When my son was in grade school, and she said, "Oh, depending, because there's a transient population, and it can be 29 or 30." And I was appalled. So I said, "Can I volunteer to help? To help? I'm a college-educated person. I can help with the reading. I can help with the math. I can help, And she welcomed that, and so I spent a year. But what I saw was the kids that were smart or were gifted were kind of on their own. She would do the and great teacher.
Yeah.
Many years ago, and she would those kids would learn on their own. They got it right away.
So, and what grade was this you were helping in? Was it a particular grade?
Believe he was second grade at the time.
Okay. Yeah.
And those kids, and then there were the kids who needed a lot of help and a little bit of help, but it was just so 29 or 30 kids. That's just too many, and especially you have such a range of kids, from kids who are gifted, who are they get it on the first time, to the kids who have to be pulled out of class, with a reading specialist, or there are other types of specialists. But that's really what got me interested in the school system to begin with, and then a few years later, when I had the chance, I ran for school board at large, lost. I think I got crushed pretty badly, and but then I ran again and won. So that's what got me interested initially. I guess the big issue that I would like to see addressed right now is redistricting. I think that's my main issue to deal with. It's going to be very unpopular. Some people might lose their seat over it. It's going to anger a lot of parents, but it needs to be done.
Yeah, I agree. And I'd love to. We can go back to redistricting, but for me, I'm delighted to hear your concern about the number of students in the classroom, because I was disappointed last year in the last process, because it's one thing for those who are there are some amongst us who are ideologically opposed to public education. Which really I find troubling, that they want to spend so much time discussing something that they dislike. But that's a small group. But that group, I understand that I'm trying to convince and bring along. But the people who purport to be strong supporters of public education, I found it frustrating when I went before the Board of Mayor and Aldermen and the school board, coming up towards the budget period, and I went and got the numbers for all the classes in the school district. And just just concentrated on the grade school, on the elementary school side, just because it gets a little complicated, and also in the middle schools, because it gets a little complicated once you get to high school because of different courses, and it's just complicated. I wasn't trying to avoid anything, but the story is very simple and straightforward in grade schools. And I went before both boards, and I read out as quickly as I could in the 3 minutes all 17 schools, and I said I was going to name the classes, the grades, because there was never a grade, say a second grade, that had 3 classes of 32, 12, and 12. I mean, they're always evenly spread. So I was
as close as possible.
So you get 30, 29, 29, or you might get 30, 28, 28. But what but that was my point. So I didn't manufacture any numbers. I didn't add any numbers in. I read them as accurate as they could be. Now there are a couple of places where there are some special programs, like the autism program at Smith Road, etc. And it's disingenuous to take, say, 5 4th grade classes, 2 of which are kids with special needs and special programs that have got 12 and 14 in them. The other 3 classes have got 30 each. There are some school board members who deliberately, and I hate to be so sort of, but they deliberately will take the 5 classes,
and
the total number, divide them by 5, and say, hey, the average, Jim O'Connell is exaggerating, the average number of kids at Smith Road is 21 per class. So the only thing that I did in my presentation to both boards was I ignored the special ed classes in elementary school. I just, they're a distortion for the public. The public needs to know what's the average Mary and John or whoever, what are they in. And in every single school in our district, shamefully I think, every single school in the Manchester School District, the largest in the state, there was only one that didn't have classes in grade schools at 29 and 30 across the whole school district. So every single school had at least one grade where the classes read, and I read them out individually, 30, 30, 30, and I made the point any school with 330s or with 330s in it should really have 4 23s. or 422s. It's easy. It's an easy thing to see. We need to hire a teacher, put them in. Now, I'll let you in a second. But what was my disappointment about that, Ross, was I went before both boards and I read the numbers, and then to hear people I like and maybe oppose sometimes, but and I hear them on social media, but also on the school board and the board mayor and alderman. I heard an alderman talk about those numbers afterwards, and he said, Jim O'Connell comes in here and he's distorting the numbers. And I'm thinking, what hope do we have of moving forward if we can't even agree the truth is the truth? So let me. I want to go back to that number in a minute, because I think redistricting. I agree with you. It's going to be difficult, and heads may roll, so to speak. But I said to Tom Brennan a long time ago, God rest him, when he was here, that if it came to it, that if when I was president of Hillside Middle School PTO, that if it was going to be Hillside, it was going to somehow be crushed under some redistricting thing. That if it made sense, if they were ready to pull off the Band-Aid, that I would stand with him in a public forum and say, going into it, we agreed that whatever way it came out, and it turns out we pulled the short straw. So, and I was disappointed we never pulled the trigger. But so I hope it does happen, and I'd like you to address whether you think it's going to happen or not, and how you think it's going to happen. So if you could just address that. But ultimately, I'd like you to address this. Today, if we were to redistrict in any fashion we want, we still would have the highest number of students per teacher of any school district in the district. In the state. So the redistricting will certainly help, and I'm fully supportive of it, but it won't address the key issue, which is we don't have enough teachers in the city of Manchester for the number of kids we have. So redistricting, and then what are we going to do once it's done?
So, and you weren't exaggerating, look at the numbers, but there's a disparity in the numbers, because it is, if you remember, and I look at the numbers monthly, you'll have a school, say a fifth grade class with 30, and you'll have a second grade class with 20. It's
Yes.
kind of crazy. And that's why redistricting is so important, because if we can move people around, we already did the first thing, which was helpful from an administrative point. Was helpful. I wouldn't call it redistricting. Kudos to Committee Woman Want, who headed the. It was more of a reshuffling of how the schools
This flow system.
system that was done. That was it was working before. Some people say don't mess with things, but now logistically it makes more sense. You can look at the system. You can understand. Okay, I'm in the school. I'm going to go here, because it was. If you look at the organizational chart, you'd have a school and they might be going to 6 different places. It was crazy.
And of course, we should note that, for instance, Beach Street, the school with the highest proportion of free and reduced lunch kids in it, for instance, and the highest proportion of EL students in the city, was the school with the widest divergence. It was going to 5 different or 4 to whatever.
Now it's 2, I believe. It's down to 2.
Yeah. And it's still down to 2, but that's.
And your arch enemy, Rich Gerard, our arch nemesis, actually had a plan.
Did someone tell you that? I didn't.
No, I'm just kidding.
Yeah, okay.
He had a plan that actually all of them would make. He fixed that his plan didn't go through, a different plan went through, but it makes sense. So that was the first part.
But it's an improvement for sure, I think.
So now once we start moving boundary lines, and that's going to be very emotional, because you're going to have parents, and I understand this, because my wife and I bought our house because we wanted to go to the Jewett Street School, and we wanted to go to Memorial afterwards.
Yep.
Obviously, Southside was part of the equation, but my wife, the most important thing is schools when we moved. Imagine, somebody like me, and it's happened. It's going to happen a lot, where they have a house, or they've lived in a neighborhood, their kids, and for maybe even generations have been going to a certain school. The boundary lines move. Those parents are there's going to be hell to pay.
Yeah.
Which is, personally, in a situation that redistricting is so important to me, I don't mind, losing an election over redistricting. To me, it's important. Will there be enough political will on the board? Human beings people are human, and all the men in the school board. A lot of people don't like to upset the public because they don't want to, upset the vote.
Well, I think the board did the right thing 5-6 years ago under Tom Brennan, maybe more, 5, 6, 7 years ago, when the board at some point made a decision, which I was excited about. This is many boards ago now, made the decision to give the authority to the superintendent, go and do redistricting. And I like Tom Brennan, Dr. Brennan, God rest him, but he was given that authority by the board, and didn't take the decisions in the end. and he was trying to be deferential to everybody, and it's just like you said, it's impossible to. So there's going to probably no ideal solution, and if so, if perfection becomes the enemy of the practical, or whatever that statement is. I would love to see it happen. I hope it happens. As a general observation, I think the Manchester School Board, excuse me for putting it rudely, which is sort of butt out of multiple things. My idea of what a school board should be is that it's like the board of a company, and you give the CEO and the management team. Yeah, you give the CEO the authority. If you're the CEO of IBM Global Services, New Hampshire, you're the CEO of our organization is running almost a $200 million organization when all is said and done, $180 million organization. At 1,000 to 2,000 staff or 1,500 staff, including all 15,000 students or 14,000 students now, and a big constituency of parents and et cetera. It's a big task, and it's no secret to anybody watching this show, because I've said it in some past time now, not so much recently, but if I were the CEO of the $180 million organization, and I don't mean you any disrespect, you know that. I'm not. None of this.
Believe you know what? As an elected official, I like criticism.
Yes.
A lot of constructive. You tell me, hey, in a nice way, tell me I suck,
Well,
then I can think about it, say, well, do I need to change?
Right.
Is he wrong, or or
what I find, Ross, is I prefer to be sort of blunt, because then it's not because I want to be blunt. It's just because otherwise I'm trying to search for words, and it takes longer to have the conversation.
It's good to be blunt.
So when I say butt out, I don't mean that in a pejorative. I'm just saying,
no, that's fine.
Like the idea would be, if you're the president or you're the CEO of IBM Global Services New Hampshire, you're given a set of tasks. You're asked to agree to, at the beginning of the year or with the financial period, you agree to certain goals and certain targets, and then you're brought before the board, and it's a tough time. CEOs have to account for, did you deliver or not? And certainly from a comparative analysis point of view, if some other, if Accenture Global Services has gotten twice as much business and grown by 10% more than you did at the end of the year, you need to account for that. So I think, as a general observation, the board of the school board in Manchester should give any superintendent, particularly this one, but give the superintendent the authority that they deserve. And when I see, and I don't want to waste any time on this unless you particularly want to, but because I don't want to, because it would be counter to exactly what my point is. When I see the board 2 years ago spending months talking about the head lice policy, when clearly the head of public health for the district says that the policy is correct, the superintendent says the policy is correct, the American Association of Doctors, whatever that is, says it's correct, and the Nursing Association of America says it's correct. And yet we have what I call the butcher, the baker, and the candlestick maker. That's not meaning to be insulting to you. We have private citizens who we have entrusted with authority. We've elected people into those positions of authority to oversee this. But when I hear people who have no expertise in the area whatsoever offering their deepest thoughts from the article they read on the back of some Facebook posting, move on. We have a district that is the least well-funded in the state of New Hampshire. We have kids not getting the services they deserve. We have all kinds of issues with our special ed program, and we spend time talking about cupcakes, head lice, and numerous other things, which goes back to redistricting. Would say, wouldn't it be wonderful if the school board said to Dr. Vargas, go do it and we'll have your back?
Let me just talk about the headlights real quick. The reason why that was touched upon is because there were so many complaints from parents to school board members. Look, the policy's not working. Yes, that might be the best practices, but it's not working. And so that's why that came about.
Yeah, I think that's the squeaky wheel treatment a little bit, because it reminds me of, I remember making a point to the school board at one point that, just as Jim O'Connell would come before the school board to talk, there are also some others would come before the sort of the chattering class. And I guess I'd have to be honest and include myself in that, much as I dislike that term. But there are people who will come before, at Hillside Middle School, where I spent a lot of time in the PTO there, the vast majority of parents, first of all, are disconnected. They're not involved.
I would agree with that.
It'd be nice if they weren't, but they're not involved. I mean, from the most well-to-do and capable and well-educated families down to the other end of the spectrum. we find people who are. It may change over demographics a little bit.
Yes,
but
I think the higher end, they're probably a little bit more involved than the
perhaps,
lower
but
end.
I've always been more shocked by that disinvolvement or uninvolvement than others, because I'm more inclined to excuse people with a language issue, a cultural issue, and two parents working two jobs each than, Mr. and Mrs. O'Connell living at home in their house in the North End who choose not to.
Gaelic might be a
involved.
primary language in that home.
Yeah. It could be. So most parents. So there's the great silent majority, right? And then there are those who are. There's the sad thing about education in America today is that there's a political edge to it. We look at the people who. I've made the point to the board before when we were talking about some other subjects that I deliberately went to a meeting and made the point at the end, spoke at the end deliberately to point out that the only person speaking tonight of the 10 people speaking that actually had a child in the public school system or somebody in the public school system in Manchester was me. And the other 9 speakers were from out of district or someplace else to speak on certain topics. Now
That hasn't happened in a while, but
It's
I know
been-
it
yeah,
was
but it
more
did-
when it was Common Core and
Common Core and all
other
that
issues.
stuff. And I also, I think this is, and we're demonstrating it here, right? I'm a strong believer in voices being heard across I grew up in Ireland. Let's go, in Ireland we had a very broad spectrum of political opinion. We went from,
I thought it was all Republicans over there. Irish Republicans.
that wasn't the case. There were quite a few of those, but even within republicanism, as it existed in Ireland, right, you had from people who believed in carrying arms and carrying out, terrorist acts, or some people would call them.
Michael, what was his name? Michael got killed.
Michael Collins.
Yeah.
No, we're going back. Now we're going back. I was
So
talking about the
let's just
1970s.
kind of, and just as I want to segue into that and back and forth
Okay.
between and you'll understand why.
Yeah,
So Michael Collins and Eamon de Valera, they both wanted a lot of the same things,
yep,
and but Michael Collins, so Eamon, and correct me if I'm wrong. He let Michael Collins fall on his sword. Michael Collins did the unpopular, but he made peace with England and they cut up the country, and so a lot of the Republicans got mad and killed Michael Collins.
yes.
So, but Eamon, my understanding with Eamon, and I always
Eamon de Valera,
I
de
always-
Valera.
I can never pronounce his last
That's
name.
right.
Was okay
Dev,
with
call him
that.
Dev because people called him Dev.
Eamon, I can still picture. He looks like a nerdy college professor.
Yeah, yeah.
He became the first prime minister of the Free
Yeah,
Ireland.
yes,
but he
yeah.
was, from what I understand, he was okay with that. But he pretended he didn't support it. But allegedly behind the thing. So you'll find that in politics, and it's definitely in the city of Manchester where people, I don't. Like a little story to bring it closer to home in New Hampshire. When I used to be a state rep, and if you remember the bathroom bill, up in Concord?
Yes.
Transgender students. That came from the Democratic Party. They were in the majority at that time, but a lot of their members didn't support it. And so they said the Republic, and I believe it got killed. I could be wrong, but it got killed. And they were saying to the Republican, their friends, please help us kill this. They
Right.
couldn't come out and say they were against it. But
Right.
that happens a lot in politics.
But
You'll have people who are against it. They want it to happen, don't want it to happen, but they'll take an exact opposite position.
Right. And I dislike that. I think people generally dislike that about politics. And, it's excusable perhaps if you're earning $200,000 a year, in some job in Washington, D.C., when you're getting a bunch of health care perhaps at best and, and $1,000, it's harder to defend. I'm no naive person when it comes to politics, but I like people. I think there's so little to be lost at the local level that being principled and standing up for what is right is easier to do. Should be easier to do. But I take your point. It happens all the time. It amazes me. First of all, the internecine nature of politics in Manchester, the interconnection between people. I find out so and so somebody's. I found out one day that a politician from one party had paid for all the signs for the other parties.
Yeah.
like how did that even happen?
I'm originally from Mass.
Yeah.
And what I found was, although Manchester is a city of 110,000 people, it's actually, in many ways, it's a small town.
Yeah.
Everybody knows each other.
Right.
But a lot of the core people are related.
Yeah. So then it's a pity that we can't get along a little better, perhaps, because and get things. I don't, at a basic level, I don't understand why, the opportunity and the possibilities in Manchester excite me. Like, I make the point, I'm somebody who was being, I think, disingenuous, but I could be wrong. Somebody phoned in last week and 2 or 3 times welcomed me to the country very graciously. And
Somebody trying to call in?
no, I think there's some interference coming out of the
Computer?
on the computer over
Oh.
here from that was left on from a
Oh,
previous edition. So,
yeah,
so-
I see the webpage is cycling.
yeah, there you
Okay.
go. We'll get rid of that. It's gone. The gremlins we're visiting, but I just the idea. So I go back and I look at it sort of, the people. When I look at Manchester and the history of Manchester and the people who built it, people came up from Massachusetts, and they built. Around the Amoskeag Falls, they built a city. They built a company, basically. It was a company town. They built it, and when you go down, I was just driving down Concord Street here, right here, on the way to this today, and I was waiting for the traffic light to change, and I looked up and I saw the Société Canado Americaine, over that what's now a Baptist church, right? But this is a nice sort of classic, sort of Gothic structure, with columns on it right there, and I go around other parts of the city. I look at Divine Millimit, the building, and I look at the other buildings, and the Carpenters and the Courier Gallery, and what people did here in the 40s, 50s, 60s, and 70s. Built. You look at the engineering feat around the canals that were built in order to create this world-class manufacturing area, and I have to say, it never ceases to. I just can't fathom it out. I think about it. I don't understand why the current generation of people in Manchester, particularly our politicians, can sit in their seats and observe and know that we have the least well-funded school system in the whole flipping state. We used to be the 10th, 12th, or 14th from the bottom. We're the bottom, have been now for 8 years. We've got the highest number of kids per teacher of any school district in the whole flipping state. Nobody, from the Mayor Gatzis, who I take at the top, from the top down. I made the point the other day, if I had the privilege of representing the people of Manchester and were elected.
Why don't you run for office?
Because I couldn't
Why didn't you run for Alderman at large?
I couldn't. I was asked
School
to
board
run
at
for
large.
but you couldn't do what I do. I like
Yes,
to.
you can.
I like to. No, I don't think you can. Because
Let
once
me
I would
just use
then be
Rich
part of.
Girard is your model for you, is your life.
He is?
Rich. Well, I want here. He has a successful radio show.
Yeah,
He has a MCTV show.
yeah.
He has a business on the side, and he's on the school board. So you can do all of those things. You can have your cake and eat it too.
Yeah, no, but I don't want to talk about Rich too much. Not that I don't mind in another way, but but in the end, so.
So why were you saying that you can't do this?
Because
and be on the city
because you're
official?
partisan. Once you're involved, you're partisan. You're constrained by you're. So I think being on the outside, I don't want to be the gadfly. I don't want to be the sort of I don't want to be like the 2 old guys in the Muppets shouting down from the gods. But I have a good relationship with someone like Rich. I can talk to, in fairness to people like Rich Girard or Joe Kelly Levasseur or Ed, who's on his show with him, and all the other people in politics in Manchester, from Joyce Craig to Pat Long, to you name it, wherever it might be. Mr. Hirschman, Keith Hirschman, who we're probably diametrically opposed politically, but he's always gracious. We talk. He listen. People accept the phone call from me because I never. I like that, and I don't mean that in an egotistical way. I just mean that stuff can happen. I can send a message to you, which I've never done. Just so the public be clear here, I've never sent you a message
You sent me an
asking you
email.
to vote.
Oh, no, not to vote.
Not to
No.
vote. But I've sent you messages and other things. But I have actually sent messages occasionally to individual members of boards saying this is coming up tonight. You know that here's I'm not saying please vote this way, but here's how I see it. And I think if I were. And I also remember another Tom Brennan statement. Tom Brennan said to me one night after a meeting, he said, when did being a public representative in a place like Manchester become such a big deal? And what he meant, I don't want to, he's not here to defend himself, but he was making the point that people get very sort of full of themselves, like a little timidity from all of us. And I say this kind of regularly here. We all need, and I too, I include myself. people knock me back once in a while, and I'm like, you're right. I should practice some of that which I preach.
But then here's why you're frustrated in some point, I'm sure.
I'm frustrated by the fact that the message is a simple one.
But what I'm
and why
saying is,
won't
give it a
people
try
move
once. Run for office. Try to make the change that you want to see. And if it doesn't work, or if it, then say, you know what, I tried. But if it does work, then stick with it.
So I'm working on a number of things, but I have to tell you. So right now I'll have 2 kids in college this coming year.
Yeah.
So my third child.
You have 3 kids, right?
I have 4.
4. Okay.
So my third is a senior. This will be a senior this year. So next year I have 3 in college, and then my fourth is going to be a sophomore. And I've been very
high school.
In high school, yeah.
Okay.
So I'll have 3 in college, 2 in college, 3 in college over the coming number of years. But I also when I go before a school board and the board mayor and alderman, and I haven't said it as much recently, but I try to say it regularly enough, which is to thank those who are there for their service.
I've heard you say that.
And I do, because I mean that, because I have some inkling about the amount of work it is. And until recently, I was involved. I was the president of the Manchester North Soccer League up until 6 or 8 weeks ago. I was running the British Coming Soccer Camp. I was the president of the
Hibernians?
the Hillside. I'm a proud member of the Hibernians. But it's impossible to do everything. And then to do what is right by my family and be there for I didn't think I had the luxury of taking more time. I'd have to, now, as it turns out, I've given up most of those positions, so my time is more freed up than it was before. And I'm working. There are issues around equity and I like to use the word fairness for minorities in the city of Manchester that I have begun work on and been meeting on, and I think there's a job of work to be done there, and that's a very difficult topic, and it's going to be difficult because people get emotional about that, just like they do about schooling, and it's connected to schools. But when that's mature, we'll talk about it. I'm not afraid to talk about it. I just don't want to. It too easily falls off the table immediately into people getting defensive. How dare you? I'm not, whatever. And especially in the current climate, Ross, it's so difficult. I was on Facebook with somebody the other day, and a couple of times I just sort of just said something to the like not talking down to them, but I said, can we? Like it was other people having a discussion. I just said, you guys, can we just lower the rhetoric? It's not helping it, or else just stop.
You and I are the exception to the rule. I think so many people now are true believers, and they want other people to become true believers like them. And in the age of people being open-minded and being civil is kind of a bygone. It's like the horse and buggy. And I'll tell you what, and I won't embarrass a guy, although I like people who disagree with me.
Right.
Not in your, like you're being insulting or derogatory, but some people who can make me think and who can have a good debate. I haven't talked to in years now, but a great friend of mine was a very liberal progressive Democrat. I'm a moderate Republican, very liberal progressive Democrat from Southern California, and we used to have great conversations because you make me see the world differently. Mm-hmm. So that's why I like to read or watch things that from a different point of view. Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. But anyways, and that just seems to be dying. But I enjoy, that's why I enjoy conversations with you, because you'll have a completely different view or a different solution or a different evaluation or diagnosis of the problem, and it makes me think, and it makes me, even if I don't change my, I have to build up or fortify my belief system. And the reason why, so I had a man who very well known in New Hampshire politics, a Democrat, and although I didn't agree with him, I respected his intelligence and his point of view. So we were friendly on social media, and we would talk, and I'm a strong believer in the state of Israel, and he wasn't. And I said, the Middle East, he was complaining about Israel. I said, well, the Middle East is a dangerous neighborhood. To me, that's a fact. It gets dark at night. Yep. Water is wet. He freaked out on me and started calling me a racist. You racist and bigot. I said, what? You want to kill Arabs? I was like, what are you talking about? I said the Middle East is a dangerous neighborhood. He goes, no. Many years ago in my synagogue, there was somebody who wanted to kill Arabs, and he said that. And I said, don't project that onto me.
Right,
And he just,
right.
and he just went off, started name calling. It was just
Yeah.
weird. And I see that more and more, just this.
Well, I find. Thank you for the kind things you said about me, but I have to say that, I think I observe that happening to a degree, but I refuse to give up that ground.
Like the
in this-
mayor's race, and this is ridiculous. And I like Joyce Craig as a human being.
Yeah, yeah.
I'd rather spend time with Joyce and Teddy, although I think Teddy would be a better mayor than Joyce. But here's the thing: this thing with Mr. Cashin.
Yeah.
There are people on the school board and the aldermen. Believe me, there are people on the school board that despise Ted Gatzis. There are people on the board of mayor and aldermen who despise Ted Gatzis. It is ludicrous to think that he could orchestrate a cover-up on the school board. There are people who would be chomping at the bit to throw him under the bus. To think that the school board is a governing body, or the mayor of Alderman is governing body, would take marching orders from Ted Gatzis and have that's just ridiculous.
So I don't know if that's the accusation that he was
He
holding the
orchestrated a
reins,
cover-up.
But orchestrated it by controlling the school board. I think it seems to me, and I could be wrong, it seems to me clear that many in the body politic in Manchester were unaware of the incident at all.
On the alderman side, I don't know. All we got, and I went through my emails
Yeah.
after the thing hit, the only email that I could find was it was a sexual assault. And my understanding, there's 3 levels of sexual assault: aggravated felonious sexual assault, and sexual assault. I looked back at the email. It said there was a sexual assault, still a serious charge, but a sexual assault could be and I don't want to minimize this, but
Yeah.
is a groping.
Right.
Somebody touching somebody else's behind, or
Right.
Obviously it could be all the way as deadly as somebody using a weapon in
Right.
intercourse.
Yeah.
But there was no detail in the thing. And from the board's perspective, maybe from the mayor's perspective, they thought that the principal and the superintendent were handling it. But it was
Yeah.
poorly
Well,
handled, poorly
I-
communicated.
I
But to say that there was a cover-up is just ridiculous.
Well, I don't know. I know that I look at where we got to today. Let me start. So I think that Mr. Cashin, an 82-year-old gentleman who I've never talked to on this topic, but who a long-time alderman. So we find ourselves between him and Mayor Gatzis, we have, two major figures in the history of recent history of Manchester politics, and we have them both involved in an unsightly thing now, and so. I just don't know. I don't know. I disagree with you on the. I don't know where to start with the sexual assaulting, because when I listened to what Dave Ryan had to say about his about what happened in that conversation, which is appalling if true, and one would have to believe that Dave Ryan made it up out of whole cloth.
He's the one who sent out the email that I was talking about.
Well, I'm talking about when he was interviewed by the newspaper
yeah,
and
he
said
said he
that
had
and the first question he was asked was what color was the boy, right? And so and now we're getting into a play, and I even repeating it, and not that I want to hide anything, but here we are on this show and we're talking about I want to talk about the fact that we have 14,000 kids going back into schools in Manchester in a month from today, and the result of the decisions of Republicans and Democrats, led by Mayor Gatzis, over the last 2 years of the current boards come to the end of their term. What we actually decided to do as a city, represented by that group of 29 people, was, in the face of having the least well-funded school system in the state, per capita, in the face of having the highest number of pupils per teacher in the state of New Hampshire, we decided on what looks like a net reduction of 14 teachers in the school district at the end of the difference between June 1st and September 1st will be there'll be 14 less teachers.
Although, just let me interject.
Yeah.
I received an email on the subject. I hope it's not confidential. It didn't say confidential. We're going to be hiring the lion's share of them back.
Yes. Well, I'm doing the hiring and the firing piece. I'm doing the pink, those who were pink slipped, and the 28 who were the retirees non-replacements. I'm adding those together, and then I'm putting back in what was found under the $2 million budget. So we're going to add delightfully.
It's my understanding that the overwhelming lion's share of the pink slipped people are coming back.
So we'll see where it is. But the numbers I have today, and I don't have accurate, I don't have the best numbers, but the best numbers that I can do today is that the net of it is minus 14. That would be because I think it should not go without saying I am thrilled. Let's put a red line underneath this. I'm thrilled that we have foreign languages, in this case Spanish, coming out to our middle schools. I'm delighted that we're getting health professionals in our middle schools, and that we're getting assistance with reading and language, English in our middle schools. I think, and the fact that we're not going to lose the 2 SROs to go to a halftime SRO. So I think that is. That's worth a lot. That's a big deal, and I think if you put on another hat, not the Jim O'Connell hat for a minute, but on another hat, I think the board rightfully could take some kudos for saying, whatever else has happened, we this is a movement in the right. We're putting something back, which thrills me, Ross, to be honest. That I love this. And I like the idea that when I said this to Dr. Vargas, that when he goes back to the school, I expect that when he goes back to the school, to the Board of School Committee and to the Board of Mayor and Aldermen at the next budget period, that he gets more of what he needs when he says, if you give me this, I will do the following. Because what has to be said, though, what I worry about, I listen to some school board members who announce that they think our schools, that we've turned a corner, we're doing better, things are doing well. And I could talk for a week about the great things happening in our schools, but I refuse to not point out the two big facts that I keep repeating, and then to say that the level funding for all programs in our schools for this current year was $170 million, a number that was never even raised. That's what it would have cost to retain all programs that we currently had. Now, we can have a discussion about were all programs needed? Should we eliminate some programs? That's a legitimate conversation, but to retain everything we had was $170 million. So the 165 was always a garbage number because it was a huge
tax cap. It was the tax
but the tax cap is a garbage number to start with, right? Because the tax cap is just nonsensical. I mean, we're looking
CPI, right? Consumer Price Index.
Yeah. So, we're not allowed to spend, again, we could talk about this, it becomes this arcane subject, but we can't spend money that we have as income in the city. We have an extra $1 million actually coming in car registrations now, and it's going to be surplus. We're giving money back to the taxpayers last year, and that's while we have these two major things. And if you go on, not the social medias and everything, but anybody looking at the city of Manchester today, talk to any realtor, the business community has said that the biggest problem in Manchester is the education problem. That's what they see as the number one issue when surveyed. And
I want to talk about that, too,
Yeah.
about the education issue. And I actually have two things. I want to ask your opinion on something. Here's the thing. We live in a democracy.
right.
And I want to ask your opinion on this. So I go door to door, Ward 7. Every election since 2006, let's say. So the last 10
Right.
years, I've gone door to door. And I hear people, and it's great because people say, hey, you suck, you're great, get off my doorstep, keep up the good work, whatever.
Right.
But what I find is people with children in the school system are concerned about the schools and aren't as concerned about the money. They're enlightened people, former teachers or whatever their background is, they're concerned. But there is a large segment, we live in a democracy, and these
Right.
people have the right to vote. There are a huge segment of people who I talk to, either they never have children or their children are out of school system, say, look, I don't care anymore. My core concern, and I hear this from many, 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 many people, they don't care about anything else.
Right.
All they care about is because property taxes is their biggest expense. All they care about is their property taxes not going up or staying level. So there is a huge segment of, and I'm sure this is probably, it might be a little bit less in a different ward, but it's probably any homeowner in any ward
Right.
in Manchester, many of the people are going to express the same sentiment. Look, I don't care about our schools. I don't have any kids in the school system, or they graduated 10 years ago or 15 years ago. All I care about is what is the bottom line is, what are my real estate taxes, how are they going to change? And that's what we're dealing with.
Yeah, no, I understand that, and it's frustrating because we do live in a democracy, and ultimately,
And those people vote.
yeah, ultimately, people get the governments they deserve. People can be. I don't want to talk about Donald Trump. People can be mad about Donald Trump or not mad about Donald Trump. They can be mad about Barack Obama or not, or whoever their person that they do. We get the people we deserve. We in the end we vote, or if we don't vote, then we deserve what we get. So sadly, it shouldn't be that big a surprise to us that So, but I then think that the job of politicians isn't just to represent; it's to lead, and this is a key element that is lost in that piece of the conversation. There's an obligation on public representatives to lead people. So this implies listening to them in the end too, but you put before them what needs to be put before them. If you could argue, you think about Charles Dickens and Oliver Twist, right? And
Are you saying that we should open up a bottle factory and put our kids in it?
I don't follow. Sorry.
Oliver Twist. It was a bottle factory, and they cleaned them, and that's how the kids.
And the kid, no, I'm saying that people at that time.
That was my attempt.
No, but no.
Thanks
I'm sorry. I'm sorry. No, but I wasn't. Yeah. So no, because I'm saying, but I'm saying like we could talk about Fagin and all these stuff, and like the answer from people in Victorian England was workhouse. We have it in Christmas Carol. Are the workhouses closed? So in an unenlightened electorate isn't really. I am convinced that if the average voter in the city of Manchester went into our schools and saw the work that's being done on a daily basis by people on the administrative side, teachers in classrooms. I've tried to give them the picture of what 30 kids in a classroom feels like. I talk about, I don't want to waste more time in here, I talk about inviting kids around for your 12-year-old or your 10-year-old's birthday party and inviting 10 of their friends. And my wife would say if one of my kids, and they were 10 years old, invited 12 or 15 to the party, like, oh my God, 15, don't stop, we can't, 15's terrible, and we've often had 15 kids, in a birthday party.
My Irish Catholic neighbors growing up had 16 children. Come on.
I would say, I could talk
they
about
were good
that too.
Catholics.
Yeah, I guess so. And I've said to people, how would you like to have not just the 15, but double that, and not have your wife or your husband around, whichever, and have to deal with, and everybody I think who's had kids remembers the birthday party for the 8-year-old and getting everything ready and the cake around the ground and everything. And I say, like, what's difficult as a voter about understanding that this is dysfunctional? And you mentioned something earlier on when you said about the kids. You call them gifted. I don't know if you call them gifted because that's probably a very special group. And we as a city need to do something on gifted. We don't have a gifted and talented program. It's another place where we need to be moving.
We used to. I don't know if it no longer exists.
But we have wonderful programs for AP and all that stuff, which is great. But we should have a gifted and talented program. But that's not where my worry is. I don't know where the exact percentage, but that top quintile, that top 20%. The kids coming out of Manchester schools, I worry less about them. Whatever that top 20% seems to, not that they shouldn't get the full support of our community and spending, but where our big, when we fund at the level we fund and have the class sizes that we have, then the people we're really underserving are as we go down through the next 20%, right? And it becomes worse and worse and worse.
Well, let me just. I have a daughter with Down syndrome. I also see, and I know what our special ed budget is.
Yeah.
We target a lot of money towards the very bottom also.
Yes.
Towards special ed and towards kids who need the extra help. My daughter, very happy with my daughter who was in special ed who had Down syndrome with her education in the Manchester school system.
And I'm glad to hear that because I have friends who've got, my very close friends have got a child with Down syndrome who's now going to be a senior this year. And has had a wonderful experience at Parker Varney and West, Parker Varney, Parkside and West, and everything I've heard is good. But I also though I speak to people all the time of special ed parents in Manchester who are frustrated by the resistance of the city to do what is required, even in the face of legal decisions against the city, and they still find it very difficult to get the services they deserve. But leaving aside special ed for a minute, just the fact that you have 30 kids I hate to use the word normal, so whatever the right word is to be correct about it, but kids without special needs, that you have 30 kids in a classroom, it just isn't right. I mentioned on this show last week, and I talked about the fact that a newer realization to me in recent times is, I formalized the thought, was that if you actually look at the socio-economic, or you look at the income levels, right, of towns in the state of New Hampshire, and you draw a map of that, and then you draw a map of the funding for schools by town, and if you put one of those on top of the other, they exactly match. The places, and it's kind of obvious. Some people would say, "Well, duh." Well, I don't accept the duh, because we have a public school system. We can.
But let me just flesh that out a little
Yeah.
bit. Because you touched on this. I actually have an article, and I'm going to give this to you. But we've talked about the two highest spending states in the country: New York State and Alaska. Now you can look at these states and see that they have very different outcomes. So money does not equal outcomes. You could have, for instance, and I was thinking about this. I was watching your show last week. You were talking something similar vein.
Yeah.
What if I had 200 kids in a high school, and it was one of these luxury schools? I was reading about a high school built in California. It cost like $1 billion to build.
Right.
It was crazy.
Yeah.
I mean, they just went out of control building. Their costs are going to be $50,000 per kid, but that $50,000 per child doesn't mean that it's all going to education. A
Right.
lot of it was to build this ridiculous $1 billion high
Yeah,
school.
I agree.
And so you can't, and just to so people, and I agree with you, you have to have a certain level of money funding per student. But some of our highest spending school districts in New York State have horrible, vulgar outcomes. And some of our lowest spending, for instance, we have Catholic schools who spend very little per child and have great outcomes. We have home schools who spend almost nothing.
I
and
would
have
challenge
great
that. I
outcomes.
would challenge that. I have had kids who went to Catholic school, and I'm high on Catholic school, but I challenge the great outcomes
You
piece.
can have this kind of interesting article.
Because I want to just, for our listeners or watchers, I want to say, this is not an attack on Catholic schools. My kids went to St. Catherine's and had a wonderful education at St. Catherine's School. But within Catholic schools, there is a wide disparity in Catholic schools in the state of New Hampshire.
I don't disagree. But what I'm saying is that there are Catholic schools that can do wonderful things on a low budget.
Right, and there are Catholic schools who can't.
And what else? I guess my point is that what I would like to see is Manchester be competitive as far as
Right.
school spending. So I don't want to be in the bottom. I don't want to be at the top. We can't be at the top.
Right.
Realistically,
Yeah.
that's never going to happen.
Well,
Let's put
let's
take
say-
our
let's say this.
rose-colored glasses off. We're never going to be the top spending
I-
school district.
all right, so
per
I don't-
pupil. That's
well,
not going to happen.
well,
unless
I won't.
a meteor of gold
Yeah,
comes down.
yeah.
and
So
lands on
I
us.
won't grant you that, because now we're talking philosophically.
But
because
I would like to be. But the point is that I'm making is if we could be average
Oh.
as far as school spending, we could do wonderful.
We could
a lot
do
of
wonderful things. If
we
we want
could
to
do
be
language down to
right,
the grade school.
if we want to be average today, right, the
On
average
spending.
number on spending, and I agree with you. It would be silly to say that money equals outcomes, and that all we need to do is spend money and that will fix everything. That would be ridiculous. I don't believe that at all. But just to give, when we were playing around, like I mentioned last week on the show, that the funding for schools in Nashua, for instance, the increase is roughly twice what it is for multiple years now. But for this year, they're
What do they
spending.
spend per pupil down there? Do you know?
I don't know, but I don't have that off the top of my head. I just know that the increase this year was 2.8%,
Okay.
and we're 1.6. So it's roughly their incremental increases, and we keep doing that, and that accumulates over time. But the fundamental issue, the just order of magnitude. We're playing around with this artificial number in Manchester based on an artificial tax cap. We take no cognizance of the real ability of people. We hear this anecdotal thing, but the ability of Manchester to support schools at an average level, I don't see any reason when I walk around the streets and I look at the what's going on in Manchester. I see no reason why we couldn't be average. And let's understand what average means. If we were to fund at the average from last year's numbers, then the school budget in Manchester should be $210 million. That's 14,000 by 15,000. Right, 14,000 students by 15,000 a year. That would be
1,000 times 1,000 is a million, so 14 times 1,000 is 14 million times 15, so 150. And 210.
$210 million.
Okay, wow.
So that's the number, right?
Okay.
That's where you now. I think it was Joe Kelly Lavasser. I think it was to him. I'm not sure. Somebody sort of like fed off to immediately. Oh, that's nonsense. Well, it only sounds nonsense when you insist on this artificial number that you're playing around with right now. So the average will be 210. As an example, Dr. Vargas, when Dr. Vargas was in Rochester, and this probably goes to this article you've got here, in Rochester they had 32 or 32,000 students. The budget was $800 million. So that would be $400 million for 15,000 students. If we were to spend what Rochester is spending, we'd be spending $400 million. Now, I'm not arguing for the $400 million. I disagree with you for a minute ago when you said, we can never be the highest one. I think that would be a place to aim for in some sort of Disney-esque magic world.
You have the most poverty in New Hampshire.
Yeah, because we have
one of the richest states in the country, but we have the most poverty of.
We have
of
the
America.
highest need. We've got the highest need, and therefore, with the highest need, we should have the highest. It should be. We should always have economies of scale, which would help. But I'd be happy with just. I won't be happy with just getting off the bottom. I just know that what we're doing today, I want everybody to lift their ambition. It gave me joy in my heart to listen to Dr. Vargas as the first person, public figure in the city of Manchester in years, to sit publicly and say, there's no reason why we can't have the best high schools in the state of New Hampshire. He said those words. And I'm like, yes. I was like the cheering section for Tom Brady. For once, I'm listening to somebody in authority in Manchester who's got the ambition to rebuild canals, refix the roads, rebuild major structures, fix our bridges, make this a city for everybody to be proud and lead. This is Ted Gatz. I disagree with you fundamentally on Ted Gatz being a better mayor. He's shot his bolt. He's been there for 8 years. Lead. He refuses to lead. He hides behind this fig leaf, which is the tax cap, saying, "Oh, woe is me. We can't do any more." I reject it out of hand. We've got the lowest unemployment in the country. We have the 5th, 6th, or 7th richest population per capita in the United States of America.
I think it's the richest per household. One of them we were
One of
number
those,
one.
right?
It was the household, maybe not per capita, but household.
So why is it we're doing so? Why we're not doing better by our kids? I have to say this. I've enjoyed. We're down to the wire here. About a minute left. So I've enjoyed the conversation as always, Ross, and I invite you back again. We should probably do this before the election so people have another chance to hear you and what you represent in the people of Ward 7. I know you have an opponent this time, so. Anyway, it's lovely to have you here. Any last comments for the people of Manchester?
No, just nothing I can think of right now.
Okay.
Just kind of spoke my mind at the beginning.
I would say, Ross, that I don't believe in blowing smoke at people just to be nice, and I would never be offensive if I have something.
I did actually. I'm sorry. I did want to get more into the just stories about quality in the Manchester schools that I've seen, but unfortunately we've run out of time.
And it would be, and it's something we need to do more here is talk about, but there are enough sort of people doing that already, but I'd be happy to do it again, because I talk often about the wonderful things that are happening in our schools, and there are great things happening in our schools, and you've got kids in the school system, I've got kids in the school system, but we have so much we could cover. I appreciate you coming on here. It's wonderful that you and I can have a discourse that's natural and normal. I hope, ladies and gentlemen, that you learn something as a result of it. Maybe you learn something from Ross, you learn something from me. I think between us we're trying to shed some light rather than heat and smoke on the problem. Thank you for spending this hour with us. I look forward to seeing you all in the audience again next week, and have a great summer. Stay safe. Thank you, Ross. It was a pleasure.
Thank you, Jim, for having me.
Bye, guys.